guest speaking beforehand, then we'll have our break and then a guest speaking afterwards. And if we can squeeze it in, then Richard's got a much abbreviated spiel about what's coming up in the night sky, which is very handy because he can go on for hours, as we all know.
No. No, it doesn't.
So, over to you, Dallas.
Okay. Where's Lynn? Oh, there he is. Well, thanks for coming along tonight. Tonight's topic is global trends in light pollution mitigation, and that's being delivered by Landon Bannister, who's the president of Dark Sky Tasmania. Landon's been working in the lighting industry for over 20 years. He's a passionate advocate of the important role that light plays in influencing human health and emotion. And I better put my glasses on. So he's a passionate advocate of the important role light plays in influencing human health and emotion and how this relates to the natural world. He sits on the local chapter management committee for the Illuminating Engineers Society for Victoria and Tasmania, and is the founder of Dark Sky Tasmania Inc and a board director of the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance. And we've also got Elliot here. Elliot Charlton. He's a technical specialist with Pendoley Environmental, undertaking artificial light modelling using some new cameras and spectrometers on the Bridgewater Ridge. And Elliot's over from Western Australia. So to you, Landon.
Now, I can't do this without turning off some lights. Is everyone okay?
Yeah. You want these on, Landon?
No, they can say, I'll just kill the front row, and then we can see the screen better. So it just feels more, and you have to look at less of me then too, which is a good thing.
That's right, that's what we usually do, Len.
So I thought it's probably a good idea to just go back a little bit about what Dark Sky Tasmania is and just do a bit of a recap before we go sort of forward with what's going on. So we're just an incorporated association that's been set up for about 4 years. We set up ourselves as a chapter of the International Dark Sky Association. Now they're sort of, if you want, the internationally recognised body that's out there sort of protecting the stars, and they've got about a 30-year history, and that was essentially driven by astronomers realising that they were starting to lose their view of the night sky. So I guess this movement goes back quite a way. It's about 35 years old now. There is a link as well. We have an MOU, as we mentioned. I sit on the board of the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance, and Dark Sky Tasmania have an MOU with these guys. And if you like, they're like the Australasian link between the IDA, because the problem with the IDA is that they are in America, so they're a bit distant. And it's really good to have the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance in Australia, because the problem with light pollution is multifaceted. And one of the best things about ADSA is that we have really good representation from astronomy, but also from ecology, from lighting, and even from health. We've got a doctor sits on our board, which is quite handy. In Tasmania, we have a really simple thing. It's basically to preserve and protect the nighttime environment and our heritage of dark sky through environmentally responsible outdoor lighting. So that sounds really, really simple. The hard part is what is environmentally responsible outdoor lighting. We thought this was a really important statement to have because we couldn't be about no lighting. So ideally, if we really want to improve the skies above Hobart, we go and we turn out all the lights, and that would be fantastic, and you guys will see some pretty cool stuff from your own backyards. But we know that as a society we've come too far. So really what we've got to ask people to do is to use less light, to use it more appropriately, to use it more responsibly. Because if we go out there and actually say no, then we're going to basically hit a brick wall straight away. We have a vision for Tasmania that we think makes a lot of sense, and that is that we should be a leader in dark sky conservation. So we know we've got some amazing skies in Tasmania, that's a given. But if you think about the brand of Tasmania, we have slogans like "Come down for air," "Pure Tasmania." It's considered at a really natural state. But we often always think about these things as during the day, going out to the forests and all those type of things. But we actually need to make that connection that Tasmania is also special, has a special natural environment by night time as well. And having lunch with the two gentlemen here today, and Elliot was saying how amazing it is to just drive 20 minutes from the centre of Hobart and just the skies that we can see from 20 minutes out, which is the equivalent of about an hour and a half that you've got to drive in Perth to get the same type of skies. So we are very, very lucky, and it makes sense that we should be a world leader in this because it's our brand. Being looking after the environment is part of who we are. To do that, we have three really basic objectives, and the first one is a bit unfortunate, but we actually know through experience and what we're seeing globally that this is essential, and that is that we do actually need policy and regulation about light. We would like for everyone to learn that it's just something we should do and we should be using it more responsibly, but the sad reality is that people often just make decisions based on price or they're scared so they overlight, and we use way too much of this resource. And we basically know that the only true way to fight it is that we do actually need policy and legislation. Whilst no one likes having extra laws placed on them, we know that this works. The second thing is we'd like to establish a Dark Sky Place in Tasmania. And a Dark Sky Place is a program run by the International Dark Sky Association that actually designates areas of land that are, if you want, protected from lights. So once they get designated, we really can't ever increase the amount of lighting in that space. So ideally for Tasmania, what we would do is we take a place like the Twa and we say, right, this is going to be a protected area, and so no one can ever add more light to that space, and so therefore the skies in theory don't get any worse over time. So that's really one of our major goals. And the last one really ties into our vision, and that is just that we should build a culture in Tasmania where we all actually appreciate darkness. And if anyone went to the Dark Mofo, I think this is really interesting because there's this, I guess, idea in a lot of cities around the world, if you go to, particularly when you travel through Asia, the cities are incredibly bright at night and they almost feel like they're daytime environments. And one of the best things about when Dark Mofo happens is that, of course, we do all the whole redding of the town, we put red gels everywhere. Now, I've never told anyone at council this because they'd freak out, but it actually cuts about 80% of the light output of all the lights when they put a red filter on. So the town actually gets a lot darker during this period, bar one little thing out at Mona that we won't talk about, or we will later. But, so it's kind of interesting that we can build this, we actually appreciate that we don't need a lot of light as Tasmanians. We can actually go out and enjoy our city at this time in this low level of light. And so I think subconsciously that culture already exists. We just need to do more things like tonight, educating more people about why overlighting is a bad thing. And it does sort of feed into the next question, the why, and I'd like to tell you that it is all about astronomy and making sure that the skies are still there for you guys so you can take wonderful images, keep sharing them on Facebook and I can enjoy them and like them every night like I do. But the reason that we have a dark sky movement is multifaceted, as I sort of mentioned before, and we break it down into four main pillars. Yes, it feeds into our carbon footprint because, of course, we're talking about overusing a resource. We're overusing light at night, and therefore we're basically using unnecessary greenhouse gas emissions to generate the electricity that runs those lights. We're also altering our circadian rhythms as humans, and this is my background, this is my specialty, and I'll talk about this a bit more later. Loss of stars, connection to cultural heritage. Well, we've got an expert on sort of how we measure that and how we understand it here tonight, but I'll dive into it a little bit. And it's also impact on ecology, and this is really important because I will get into what's actually happening globally, and what's really interesting is how this ecology sector is really driving a lot of legislation and change in the global sector. So this loss of stars, we've often used this image about the light pollution and how it grew slowly over the United States from late 50s, mid 70s, 97, projected into 2025, which have already actually surpassed. I just find that one interesting because what it shows is that light pollution did grow very, very slowly. And it's just like, if we could stand in our backyards in 1950s in Tasmania, look up, see the Milky Way, and if someone took that away overnight, of course, we'd be all really, really upset. And the reason we didn't get upset is because it did happen very, very slowly, very, very gradually.
Going right.
Yeah. What are you talking about? But very much like going grey. Now, there was a really interesting study that came out last year, and it's by a guy called Alessandro Sanchez as well. And basically that is the title, First Estimations, Global Trends in Nocturnal Power Emissions Reveals Acceleration of Light Pollution. What was Alessandro talking about? Well, basically he took satellite data and looked at a period of 25 years and looked at what the global trend of light pollution growth was. And whilst it's not coming out very well on this slide, there's something really interesting that's happening at the moment that we are really, really concerned about. So basically here we're sort of tracking what the growth of light pollution is, and basically what it come up with is, as a blanket rule, it's gone up 49% in the last 25 years. So that's a pretty big increase. But what the grey dark area here says is, well, that's measuring light pollution as we could with satellites, which picks up basically certain wavelengths, but what it doesn't pick up is a lot of the blue spectrum, the blue end of the spectrum when it comes to how they actually do these satellite imageries. And essentially, we're actually missing all of this data. So whilst we thought it's definitely gone up 49% in 25 years, what Alessandro's paper says is it's quite possible that if all of these lights have been changed over to LED, and we're changing them over to 3000K LED, then it's quite possible that it could be as high as 270% in a 25-year span. The next slide, the lighter grey, is what if we're all changing up to 4000K, which is a cool white light source, which is the very blue-rich light sources, which I'm very sorry to say are exactly the same light sources that TAS networks are rolling out all through our suburbs and over our bridge and all around the place, and they have a lot of blue. And if we assume that we've done and gone and changed all our lights to 4000K, well, it's quite possible that light pollution got up as high as 400% in the last 25 years. So in other words, and this is why it's great to have Elliot here tonight, because this is his field of expertise, how we measure this is really interesting, and it's in a way, satellite data doesn't work anymore, because we've hit a stage where the technology on the satellites isn't going to work, and this is where the work that Elliot's doing, we hear about, is absolutely crucial and critical to what goes forward in our understanding of light pollution. This is a bit of a graphical example of what we're talking about. This is the city of Milan. This is the old lighting. It's the same type of lighting that we've had in Hobart for many, many years. It's a sodium light source. It's that really, really warm colour, and it actually doesn't cause a lot of impact in terms of sky glow. The haze that we see above our cities that we talked about just before, the bit that stops us from seeing the stars. When they upgraded to LED, they put in, again, these cool white light sources, which is really, really bad on many, many levels, but most importantly, it really does increase sky glow. So if we look here, this is a typical HPS that we have in Tasmania versus an LPS, which we don't use anymore. And if we compare it to the LEDs that we're currently rolling out, it just on a one-for-one comparison, you're looking at about 2.5 times the amount of sky glow out of that light source. And as we say, unfortunately, this is the light source that TAS Networks has decided is a really good idea to roll out across Tasmania. So we will undoubtedly see light pollution increase in this state as well, and this is why we talk about acceleration. It's because of this technology shift into these blue-rich light sources. So it is a bit concerning. I will say that there are other things that they can do which can help with LED, which can improve. But all of the studies that we've looked at so far globally, whenever there's been a change over to LED, particularly to 4000K, essentially the light pollution has gone up in that city. So.
Which one of those uses the least power per watt hour?
These days, the worst one, but there's very little in it. There's very little in it.
Yes.
The main justification now for LED is control and also maintenance. And when power authorities are looking at lighting, because if you think about it, it's a corrupt system in Australia, because the people that are responsible for street lighting are the same people that then have to sell the power that run the street lights. So there's not a lot of incentive for them to use energy efficiency. Their two main drivers in Australia are cost and maintenance. And so the longer a fitting can last, the better it is for them. And there's lots of problems basically with the setup in Australia, which I'll talk about later if you like. We'll move forward. I didn't want to just put a damper on it. Looking at the stars is very, very important, but there is another thing happening, particularly in Australia, that's actually driving a lot of change and a lot of interest. and it's actually the loss of culture. The main driver of this was a paper put out by Dwayne Hamisher this was about a year and a half ago now. And basically the paper says, whitening of the night sky is a form of cultural genocide. Now that's a really powerful statement, but essentially what Dwayne and his team were saying is that so important was the connection to stars to Indigenous culture here in Australia, but also globally. In Australia we had the world's first astronomers, so 60,000 years of star knowledge, and through this whitening of the night sky we're essentially losing that knowledge, and we're losing something that's quite important to us as a nation. And so they put this paper out, and as you can imagine, reconciliation is a really big story at the moment, and Indigenous affairs are very topical, and so this has actually gained a lot of attention, and so it's adding into this story of people now starting to want to address light pollution because of essentially loss of this amazing cultural history that we have in this country. So part of the story. Greenhouse gas emissions, I just want to brush through this really quickly, but I think it's important to remember that Bureau of Statistics 2019 and 2020, only 7% of our energy use was renewables, which means 93% wasn't. When we look at carbon emissions for councils, street lighting makes up between 30 to 60% of their total emissions. And what's really sad in Australia is that we've upgraded over 40% of an estimated 2.6 or 2.3 million street lights, and only less than 4% have smart controls. So one of the beautiful things about LED is we have the ability to dim it back when people aren't in the area, or use motion sensors, or turn it off when no one's around. And in actual fact, no one's doing that. We're just burning these lights all night long in Australia. And in New Zealand, that figure's over 90%. So New Zealand are streets ahead of us in terms of street lighting. So I think that's really quite sad. And also, I think it's over 97% of those are 4,000 Kelvin, so very blue rich, again, adding to that problem of sky glow. Light pollution as such, or outdoor lighting, isn't huge in terms of the global emissions. It actually only makes up about 1% of the global carbon footprint. However, we do estimate that we waste about 30% of it. And if you want to work that out, that actually does have a fair impact on global warming. This is my field of expertise, basically how light affects human health, our biology. And I put this image up really, really simply because for many years, even though I was sort of drawn into the dark sky movement, I was still a big believer that you would do far more damage in your own homes than what you would ever do outside. And so could we really argue that outdoor lighting had an impact on human health? And I've come to the conclusion that it absolutely can, and I've come to the conclusion on a handful of ways. And the first thing is that there are actually now 3 major studies that look at where you live in the world and in terms of the light pollution in your area and its impact on health outcomes. And so the first study basically says the more heavily light polluted area you live in, the more likely you are to get breast cancer. So that's pretty significant. There's actually 2 studies that justify this, and they're significantly large. Another one which came out basically said the higher the level of light pollution where you live, the more likely you are as an elderly person over the age of 65 to use sleep medication. So this also sort of makes sense. And then the next major study that came out, which was in Korea, and again a massive population base that they did the study from, was antidepressant medication in adolescents. So again, the more heavily area of light pollution, the more likely you were as an adolescent to be on antidepressant medication. And so these things are quite simple, but the question is why? How does this actually work? Surely you are doing more damage in your own homes. Well, the basic scenario of how light works is we actually now think of it a little bit like a drug. We actually need a good dose of this drug light during the day because that's what gets our systems awake and alert, and there's nothing actually better for you than sunlight in the morning. Adversely, if we get too much of the drug during the evening, because again, a diurnal species being humans, we are a day and night species, and if at night time we're actually not used to light, we haven't evolved with light. And so when we start to actually administer too much light during the evening, we start to throw out, if you want, this circadian balance that we have. And the circadian balance is really important to your body's health, it's really important to your body's recovery, really important to your body's signalling. And so the theory is that essentially by spending, it's like a dose. Is the outdoor lighting actually causing the health issues? No, but it's contributing. In other words, because you have more light pollution, you are more likely to experience adverse health effects. And so I think this is quite important because it does mean that overlighting our cities, and particularly again these cities in Asia and you know, St. Petersburg in Russia that have light levels that are almost as bright as day now, this is really not good for people. It's not what we're involved with. Wildlife is another interesting one, and I just thought I'd cite this one because it was a meta-analysis basically looking at a whole heap of studies. We have over 600 species that we studied, excuse me, today. This study basically ruled a lot of them out, but it still broke down over 300 species because you know, that we peer-reviewed, university-backed, independent studies. And what they found is that actually this wildlife is getting affected in a whole host of different ways. And I guess, you know, without diving into this too much, what they said is that the issues are widespread. We only need a very small amount of light to disrupt certain species. So that's important. And this is the worst one, is that we used to think the impacts of light pollution were actually reversible. But what we now know is that some of these issues with certain species are actually long-term and in some cases irreversible. So we've actually caused permanent damage to surrounding light. And when we talk about what those type of damages could be, I mean, it's different to humans. So in humans, we're talking about on a biological level. And yes, we absolutely affect animals on a biological level. But there's other things like navigation, which gets affected. Fauna in trees actually throws out their seasons. Pollination, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Sorry to put up the crude image, but this is mating seasons of Tamar wallabies. So they found that Tamar wallabies living in heavily light polluted areas were delaying their mating season and breeding less than those in dark areas. So of course this has an impact. And I just stole this image from Keisha, David Walsh's wife, posted this on Instagram last week when Dark Mofo was on. Almost bragging about the insect apocalypse that was going on out there. That's insects trapped in the beam of spectra. So not only causing you guys all sorts of havoc trying to look up at the sky, but that's just a small part of that beam when you go out there and seriously those insects basically perish. So quite an issue. Excuse me again. So what we've now basically come to with light pollution is that the weight of evidence has got to a stage where we actually used to define light pollution as the inappropriate or excessive use of artificial light at night. And the definition is actually shifting. What we now say is that all outdoor light is harmful. So all outdoor light is a pollutant. And there's no sort of two ways around that when you look at the weight of evidence. And what that means is when you come to that conclusion, then we really do have to start thinking about using it more responsibly. So who is doing this? Who is using light more responsibly? The poster boy at the moment in the world is France, because they released what they call the French degree for light pollution, and this happened a few years ago now. What is really cool about this legislation is it's both public and private. So essentially it covers the whole of the country. And they set it up for two reasons. Basically they wanted to protect certain areas around the country. So they've actually got 11 designations, some of them for ecological purposes, some of them for astronomical significance. And those 11 areas are the most highly tied sort of designated, so the rules are now really, really strict. National parks, for instance, you have to use really, really warm colours. You can't use any cool colours at all. They limit the intensity, they limit the upward waistline. There is no such thing as 4000K LED that we're using here in Australia and in France. You're only allowed to use 3000K or less. And so they've been doing this, and essentially the closer you get to cities, the slightly more lax the laws get. And so as you move away, the rules become tighter in the more rural areas. Now, we haven't seen any papers published yet, but I was listening to a conference in the UK about a month ago now, and one of the guys looking at what's happening has actually said this has been incredibly positive. So the results that they're seeing just in the space of 2 years is actually showing that they're actually being able to reduce light pollution rather than having it grow like we're seeing everywhere else in the world. So this is incredibly positive. Excuse me once more. I have to talk about Germany and the Insect Protection Act. So this was introduced very, very recently, just passed literally about a month ago in Germany. They found that they had reduced the biomass of flying insects by about 70% in the space of a decade. Now, that sounds like a lot to me, but to the ecologists that were studying this, they called it the insect apocalypse. And obviously insects are pretty important to our ecosystems because the flow-on effect, and we've seen this in Australia with the decrease in the bogeyman moths, which directly affected the pygmy possums, and so we're seeing examples of this in Australia. So they've actually, and I put this one up, this is one of the extracts from the standard. So the standard's broken into 4 pillars, and the 2 big ones are pesticides and light pollution. But I just put up that searchlights and sky spotlights are actually banned from dusk till dawn for 10 months per year, and I just put that up because that means a spectra wouldn't happen in Germany for 10 months of the year, which is good. But basically it just has a whole bunch of laws for any outdoor public lighting that it has to be sort of sensitive and, if we want, as they say, insect friendly. So I think this is really positive that they're doing this, driven by ecology. Croatia also have a Light Pollution Act. It's a national law, and again they limit colour, temperature, and you'll see that they also limit light on water. So that's basically acknowledging that light that trespasses into water can have an impact on marine life. Yes, Elliot? Yep. Yes, good. Again, your expertise, not mine. Good. So this is a really positive one. We have to share the National Light Pollution Guidelines on Wildlife. Is anyone here aware of this document? I know you are, because Elliot, who works with Pendoley Environmental, actually they were integral in helping the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment put this document together. This has been amazing because what we're actually seeing is, because of the Environmental Protection Act, we're now seeing state governments and local governments actually enforcing this paper, if you want, or this guideline on their projects nationwide. And this is really important because the Rio Tintos and the BHPs of the world have previously just done whatever the hell they want. And now they've got government saying, no, here's a document, here's actually something that you have to look at, and we want to see this complied with. And they're actually now having to measure and track and justify what they're doing with lights in these developments. And what really blew my mind is we recently saw this enforced on a project, I think it was in South Australia, and there was literally no ecological significance on this project site at all. Like there was just, this is based around migrating species. There was no migrating species in the area, but the council just went, this is actually like a best practice document. So this is the one we're going to point to. And so the developer on that site has to go through the process, which is fantastic. So really important and something we should all be aware of that this document exists. You'll find it on basically the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment. They now have a light pollution page. You can actually go there. They've got some really cool little videos which are particularly good for children.
That's about to disappear off that website.
Is it?
Yeah, I actually work for them.
Bastards.
No.
What's Caesar doing to it?
They've split the department again.
Oh, okay. All
So
right.
it'll be Department of Energy and
Yep.
yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Very good. All right. I think Caesar's going to keep his job, hopefully, because they've actually got one guy now full-time working on light pollution issues and stories, which is great. And he studies down here, so he's down in Tasmania from time to time. But yeah, I think this is really important to know that the government are at least actively starting to look at this as well in Australia. What happens a bit more locally, we have to point this out because this was another fantastic initiative, and to the best of our knowledge, probably the only sort of similar thing happening in the globe. We didn't know of anyone else doing this, but it's a bit of a tragic story, and you will never read this because it's not official. This didn't happen, but I'll tell you it happened, but it didn't happen. I'm not sure, should we cut the video? Okay, let's say allegedly or apparently they had an incident on Lady Barron Island where they had about 400 shearwaters perish one migration season. And looking at the causes, they're trying to work out what caused it, and they thought it might be the light pollution. And so their environmental department, which is very proactive at TasPorts, actually initiated this document, and they went about retrofitting and rectifying the lighting at Lady Barron. It was really interesting because ships have international regulations about the type of lights that they have to have on them, and they couldn't get around it. So they just simply said, no ships in port during migration season, which is a pretty big move for TasPorts to do. But pleasingly, they haven't had any deaths since. So whilst the deaths never actually happened, they might have, but we know that it's actually been successful. And really pleasingly as well, we've just seen a development application in Devonport for Tasports, and they're requiring that light pollution standard be, even though it's not in a migration area, because this is really the first ever astronomer-led legislation in the globe at the Canary Islands. And really significantly, it actually celebrated its 30th birthday a few years ago, a year ago. So they've actually been protecting the skies above the Canary Islands for 30 years. And I think that's just magic. And this was 100% astronomer-led, trying to protect what they had with their observatories there and not wanting to lose it. So this is sort of, again, just sort of highlights how long this movement's been going on and how it can be quite successful at the same time. Finally, we have to say that there is a similar legislation in Australia, though not quite as expansive. Unfortunately, this only covers a 200-kilometre radius, and we know that sometimes that's just not enough. But what is pleasing here is the New South Wales Planning Department, and they are strict on this. So we probably think about light pollution coming from light fittings, like we've got the classic example out in front of the library, balls on sticks, half of that light goes up into the sky. But there's all sorts of other things, you know, media screens, even car headlights can be light pollution. But flares from mines are a huge part for Siding Springs because they have all these mine sites basically surrounding them. And of course, when those flares all start going off, it really starts to mess with their equipment. And the New South Wales Planning and Environment Department have been really, really strict on new mine sites going in because of this reason in that 200-kilometre radius. So I think that's really great. Just recently, Waverley Council, eastern suburbs of Sydney, they're embarking on a dark sky reserve, and they've actually passed a resolution for light pollution laws in a council. I think that's really good. Hobart, not quite as progressive, but you know, we do have it on the radar. So this is their strategic plan 2019 to 2029, 6.1.7, support and run initiatives to reduce light pollution and enhance. So it's not going to get worse, we're going to enhance it, which means to me, we're actually going to bring back some of the night sky, some of the stars to Hobart. I think I saw 3 when I was in the city the other night. Who knows, this time next year we might have 10. But it's good that it is on their radar. I think that's positive as well. So I think that's sort of where we are at the moment in the global sense. I just wanted to share 2 stories, I guess, or little images. The first one about, you know, why this is a really good thing to sort of support and why we think this can happen in Tasmania. And we've got a glowing example is Flagstaff in Arizona. It's a town of about 100,000 people, so we'll call it a Launceston. And 15 years ago, they became the world's first dark sky city. And to become a dark sky city, it's a bit like a dark sky place. It's a protected, if you want. And to protect it, they actually have to have legislation in their planning laws that is all about nighttime sensitive lighting. And basically, every single development from there on, from that legislation being enacted, every time a light fitting was retrofitted or replaced, it meant that it had to comply with these planning schemes. So it had to do the things that we wanted to do, you know, direct light down, make sure it's dimmed down, turned off when it's not needed, use really warm light sources that create less sky glow. And so slowly but surely, over the last 15 years, they've been doing this. And so, you know, because you can't go out and replace every light in the city, it's just too expensive. No one's going to do that. You can't go and turn out every light in the city. So they've just made smarter decisions the last 15 years. And in the last 10 years, while the rest of the world's got their light pollution going ballistic, these guys have actually managed to reduce their light pollution by nearly 10%. So they're actually seeing a lot more stars in the skies above Flagstaff, Arizona than they were previously. And as a lighting person, the thing I always remind people is that the people of Flagstaff are no worse off. In actual fact, as a lighting person, I can promise you they're actually better off, because this type of lighting is what's natural to us. We are not used to really bright and glary light in the night. It's not what we've evolved in. You know, lower levels of light, warm levels of light, directed levels of light. We actually don't need a lot. We've got amazing devices in our eyes, and you guys know this because you go out and take amazing shots in the dark. You know exactly what we're talking about. And so I can promise you that city is a much nicer place to be in the night time than most other cities around the world that do have this sky glow problem. The last one is just an image that was put together by NASA a few years back. This is a town in China. I can't even remember the name of the town because my Chinese pronunciation is terrible. But it's just like, you know, it's just this great visual representation of, again, what we're talking about, of getting rid of this light pollution. This is, you know, that is light pollution, all of that glare. And so they went to the town and they said, look, this is what we want to do, you know. And if you show this to most people, they go, oh, why would you bother? They've already got great skies. That looks beautiful. That's amazing. But the reality is, that's what they actually had when they turned off most of the lights. Not every house wanted to participate on that, but most of them did. So it's a really small difference, but it just shows you how much of an impact we can make just by reducing and protecting and shielding what we have.
So in China, did you say?
That was in China.
And not every house participated.
There's
That's what I want.
yeah. You've got to remember in China, like, lighting is really, really cheap, and so it's a massively overused resource. They do turn off the lights in a lot of the cities now after 11 p.m. Because they're using, it's more of a power issue than it is the cost of lighting. But lighting there is so cheap that they use a lot of it. So unfortunately, we see this a lot. Excuse me again. Look, that pretty much concludes what I was going to talk about. I'd like to say that the future looks dark. Bright. I'm hoping the future looks darker. Yeah, so thank you, and I guess we'll throw it open if anyone's got any questions. I'm going to go
I can start off with one, because I was looking at some outdoor lights to replace old ancient ones.
Yep.
And
nothing wrong with
I
that mention.
when they're narrow beam lights or shielded lights, and I came up with International Dark Sky Association, but no models of lights that were shielded. No models of lights that had a narrow beam sensor on them, for example. Any hints of what I should search for?
Yep. Yeah, build your own. I often just shield mine with little metal shrouds and things like that and build my own. It's really, it's very hard on the domestic market because it is very price conscious and they don't really care much about this sort of thing. It's commodity product in and out. Really, really difficult. But there are good products out there, and I guess shoot me an email. I'll just point you in the right direction. But yeah, you can find them. Just not often at Bunnings.
Would you say that there's been quite a big push towards the LED lights across the board?
Yeah.
Yeah. That seems to be that maybe that's all that's available. Not all that's available, but more readily available.
Certainly in Australia, because of our proximity to Asia, where most of the LED manufacturers are, so the cost is quite attractive in the Australian market to go that way, and we also have very lax legislation. So yes, LED is not all bad. It has some really good properties, the ability to be able to control it, the ability to be able to send it exactly where we want it to go. Dimming is harder with some other traditional light sources. So there are some good things, and we're also now tuning wavelengths of light. There's now lights where they literally have no blue in the spectrum and still looks like white light. So we are playing around a lot with LED because we can pretty much do anything we want with it because it's electronic. It's not discharged, so it's a much interesting, but that technology is catching up. And when France introduced their laws 2 years ago, I probably missed it on the screen, but there was a thing there that in national parks you can only use a light source less than 2,400 Kelvin, which is quite a warm light source. Your old incandescent globes are about 2,700, so it's warmer again than that. That technology basically did not exist at the time that legislation came out. And what's happened since then is that the LED manufacturers have been really, really quick. And we've now just, in Tasmania, we're just about to see the first rollout of a technology in 2,200 Kelvin in Kingston, along creek bed to try to minimise the impact on wildlife because they don't, possibly, where the playground and park is there. Yeah.
With the LEDs, I mean, obviously you can make LEDs virtually any colour, temperature colour you want to.
Yep, pretty much.
And you were talking about all our street lighting just been converted over to LEDs. Has Networks actually sort of asked anybody about colours, or did they just sort of go for the cheap ones?
No, it's a very, very interesting story. So you can make LED any colour, but there's efficiency losses because pretty much about 99% of the LEDs that are in the market start their life as a raw blue chip. So when they're turned on, they're just blue light. And to get them into white light, we have to add phosphors, like the old fluorescent tubes have, that white powder. Similar process. So we're adding all of these phosphors, and as you can imagine, if you're trying to turn something blue into warm, there's a lot of phosphor you've got to add, so you do lose some efficiencies, but you're also adding cost. And so the cooler ones are actually cheaper and a little bit more efficient and a little bit easier to make, and it's all just a little bit easier. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that there is a ridiculous notion that it's safer to have daylight light sources at night than versus warm light sources, which is what Networks' decision making is. Oh no, it's safer. Cars can see people and drive safer.
And they can't.
No, it's easy to see things in your headlights.
Yeah, it's actually a lot glarier, the cooler light sources and the warmer light sources. That research is really flawed. And I will say there are studies that definitely support what Networks are saying, but what they're doing is ignoring all the studies that say that what they're doing is wrong.
So you say we've got to go and start running people over at night so that...
Only if you know them.
As long as after you've done it you say, I was blinded by the street lights, that'd be really good. Yes, but it's really funny that it is this idea of cooler light is safer, and there's a handful of studies globally that have said that. One of the most prominent studies was in Seattle, and Seattle has now gone and retrofitted all their 4,000K lights back to 3K to make them warmer because they realised, oh, hang on, this is terrible.
On the double check, your definition of cooler and warmer. Cooler is a higher
CCT or correlated colour temperature.
Higher colour temperature, higher.
Yeah, so the higher the number, the cooler it is. It's basically the old black body locus, so burning a black filament.
In astronomy,
the hotter it gets.
The higher that temperature it is hotter.
Yes.
So I'm just double checking here.
Yeah, sorry, the lower the correlated colour temperature, the less blue. As a rule, not as a steadfast rule, but as a rule of thumb, the less blue will be in the light
So
source.
why are we seeing more white or blue light in car headlights? And what are the manufacturers doing about it?
Same reason, they're brighter. So car headlights, essentially it's an efficiency gain. They're running on a battery. They want them really, really powerful. And you can dive into this, but there are people now really hot on this subject because what's happening is that the car manufacturers are coming out with these really blue-rich, really blinding headlights that we're all having trouble with, and we all know we're having trouble with, but they're actually ticking the boxes of the standards. So car headlight standards are really, really strict, and they run all the maths, and it works out. But you've got to go right back to how the maths was invented, and the maths was invented in the 1940s, and back then light globes were this big. And so what we know is when we then take a light source that's this big, size of a Tic Tac, the metrics and the mathematics no longer stack up. And so what we've got is computers telling us that these things work, they're great, and the user experience is going, no, these things are terrible. And it's exactly the same thing with our street lighting. You know? On paper, everyone's going, oh yeah, these things look great. And then we go out and we go, gee, I can't see a bloody thing. I actually have, my street's been retrofitted with LED streetlights, and since it happened, this was about 2 years ago, joggers now, put head torches on overnight. And cars, you see them drive along with their lights on high beam, and it's terrible. My wife pulls into our street and pulls the sun visor down. The lighting's supposed to be there to help things that help us see better. It's actually not. So it's a false economy.
Has Dark Sky actually written to any government departments or politicians to sort of draw this to the local attention?
Well, we do a lot, particularly that.
Oh.
We do try, obviously, but this is why I really like being involved in it, because I come from a lighting sales background, and I can tell you we are fighting $1 billion industry. One of the worst things that happened, or one of the worst things I ever read, was a a sales manager for a very large outdoor lighting company when the AMA came out and said we should not be using anything above 3,000K in the form of street lighting. And he came out and said, and he had this published in a paper, the AMA has a lot to answer for. They've cost this industry hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
You know, so it's big dollars. These guys, they don't want to change, and these are the guys that are sponsoring these studies that say yes, keep doing what you're doing, and these are the guys that are in the era of government. And one of the most powerful lighting lobbyists in Australia is actually made up of all manufacturers, and they just lobby the government, lobby the federal government to keep the status quo. So it makes it hard with the science. And this is why having DORA involved now is so important, because we can get them to go to the Australian Energy Regulator and start the conversation, because coming from us, we chime in and then someone else comes in from the manufacturers and goes, we don't want that.
So it's like the gun lobby in America.
It's very, very similar. It's very similar.
Question over here. Where we've come from basically is we've had high pressure sodium and mercury vapor light.
Yep.
The biggest problem that initially with those was the bulbs.
Yep.
Because they reflected multiple atmosphere. So many years ago, we're from Gold Coast, Brisbane area, so we're cotton heaps of this, particularly LED lighting going in now. But what we used to try to get companies or councils to do was, where possible, change to colour lighting in those particular type of lights. So with the LED lighting, how much does say a full colour LED reduce the light spill or trespass into the sky compared to a bulb?
Quite a bit, anywhere between about sort of 3 to 7%. So it's quite a portion of the output, definitely.
One of the problems that many years ago they had in Brisbane was that council had ordered literally thousands of these bulbs and had massive supplies that they had to use up. So that's why the bulbs were going out. And then the mercury vapor lights were the ones lighting the streets in your suburbs and things like that. But now, particularly on the highways throughout the Gold Coast and up to Brisbane, you're seeing lots and lots of LED lighting. Some of it isn't. I'm aware of some of it's colour lighting.
Most of it should be now. Like, there would be very, very little non-cut-off LED, because as I say, that is one of the advantages. That there's all sorts of angles of reflection still happening within those fittings that do send some light up. You get about 1% versus, it was about 3 to 10% of the old bulb type distributions. But the problem being is that increasing sky glow, the reflected light that comes off the road, the reflected light that comes off everything, we know that we're basically, even though we've got full cut-off, we're actually still increasing sky glow.
So they need more LED lights to cover the same area?
No, and this is a real bigger problem again in Australia, is that when the standards were written, we based our standards on every other global standard that existed at the time. But of course, being Australia, we had to have our own. When they looked at the economics of streetlights in Australia, of course, we've got more road per head of capita than anywhere else in the world. And they went, we actually can't afford streetlights in Australia. Because anywhere else you go in the world, you have a pole every sort of 20, 25 metres. In Australia, that's about every 50 metres. And how you get a pole to go from 20 to 25 metres to 50 metres is you actually remove all the glare metrics. And so what they basically said, so if you think about light, and you think about a car headlight, when they're angled down, they're not a problem. Someone puts it on high beam, now it's shining in your eyes, it's glaring. So what we basically did in Australia is we used to have to put poles sort of 25 metres apart. To do that, and the light's angled down and it's not in your eyes. We went, no, we want them at 50 metres apart. Now all of a sudden all the light does that, and that's why they're so glary in Australia, because we just think cost is more important than actual human comfort. And we've actually got the worst lighting standards in the world. And because of our economic situation of having more road per head of kilometre, or per head of capita.
So a question then about what we can do about retrofitting the lights that we've got. So you talked before about how with Mona we had the red everywhere.
Yep.
So is it feasible economically, as well as making it more palatable for organisations to say, well look, you don't have to buy new lighting, you don't have to put covers on them. Can we just actually cover the lenses, change the lenses, film them? Is that going to change sufficiently the issue, or is it actually the globe itself that's the
You can
issue?
do it in private space, no problem at all. You
Yeah.
just can't do it in public space, because once you start changing light levels, then you've got legislation and litigation and issues
Okay.
as well. So we had Mona wanting to do that out the front on Liverpool Street,
Yep.
and the Hobart City Council were incredibly concerned. Being Mona, they still managed to do it with a handful of the street lights, because it's Mona, and they just put red filters all through the street lights. But the backlash they were copying, because if there's an accident, we now don't have enough light, we don't comply to standards, and that's litigation risk. So it's kind of hard,
Right.
which is why we are better off to just
Change the
use
policy and
technologies.
legislation.
Yeah.
But it does actually practically work by just, you don't actually need to change the globe itself. You could have a 4,000 globe in it, but don't have
We
one
can
in
filter
colour.
out, there's technology to definitely filter out that, just filters and all sorts of things
Okay.
that will be used. It's what theatre people do all the time.
Right, and so partnership-wise with the Dark Sky various movements throughout the world and particularly here, could we look at partnering with some of the lighting manufacturers to actually get them into making that sort of thing?
They already are.
Right,
So
okay.
it's like everything. There's always early adopters.
Yes.
So we have with the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance, we've got about 5 manufacturers that are signed on with us that are submitting light fittings for testing that we send to an independent auditor, and they assess them on criteria that we essentially come up with. What was really good with lighting people, astronomers and ecologists come up with a list of criteria that we thought was important.
Capital analysis.
And we've got manufacturers. It's interesting because this is the company that makes in-ground uplights, and they're now seriously having to look and consider, right, well, as a socially responsible company, should we be actually selling these things? How do we sell them appropriately if we are going to sell them? So this is happening. It is the movement is there. It will take a long time to filter through the whole market, because these guys are generally, socially responsible companies are sort of in a higher tier, and you've got everyone else down here doing whatever the hell they want because they can.
I was just thinking, like Stefan was saying, the issue is that you can't find anywhere to buy these things, so you need someone who has links to some of these manufacturers to be able to put it on and say, well, if you go here, here and here, you can get them.
Yep.
And
we would love to be able to do that in Australia, but it's an economy of scale. Like it's a 25, 27 billion, it's not a lot of people. In the US, the IDA do have that, and they have it for domestic. And then, of course, the problem is that they work on 110 volt, we work on 230 volt, and those fittings don't come into Australia, so you can't get them here. But yeah, we can certainly drop us, if anyone needs it, just drop us a line. We can say, well, these guys and these guys are pretty good.
There was a question up the back.
Yeah, hi. Greg Block up from the Gold Coast, here with Peter. If you go back late 80s, early 90s, he and I got involved with some of the local astronomers up there, because we started a couple of societies up in Brisbane, mid-80s in Brisbane, Southern Astronomical Society, Brisbane Astronomical Society. So we got interested in this subject 35 years ago. And we started to talk about a lot of what you're talking about here, but for the most part, at the time, because we had young families, full-time jobs, we felt like we were standing on the tip of an iceberg where we were basically unsupported by what we could see was an industry that really wasn't taking much interest at all in what we had to say about its impact on the night sky. We learned very quickly that we're wasting our time talking about the impact of the night sky. And we would probably have more success if we talked about impacts on the environment around us, the amount of carbon we save by moving to lower wattage and using cut-off lighting, and that got into legislative issues to do with legal issues should there be an accident, as we mentioned before. It all got too hard enough for companies. We gave it up. It's just too hard. So it was interesting to come along here tonight and hear about this, because we could see echoes of what we talked about 35 years ago. And one of the things that struck me was saying, if you could get into use a lower wattage light and save a bit of carbon going into the atmosphere, but that's naturally going to happen anyway with the use of LED technology. So there goes one of the supporting platforms behind the arguments, and in the end we gave up. But the things we did learn were things such as you need to find champions within the industries, such as the lighting standards and the people who are setting the purchasing standards, such as Injects in Brisbane for the lights, who are responsible for them. There's a whole range of we recognised that the stuff that authorities were buying in Australia were just sort of the leftovers by comparison to what was going into the States and China. So we're hardly going to turn that market around by ourselves. And in the meantime, I must admit that we moved away from visual. We're here for other reasons tonight, and it's all revolves around taking images of the sky using filters. So we've been able to carry on what we do, what we love doing, using technology that defeats the light pollution, even though it is there. And so we haven't given astronomy away. We've just taken another approach to doing what we love to do. So thanks for explaining this to us, and at least I see there's efforts going on, but I hope your efforts are more robust and a bit more broad spectrum, if I can use that term, than what we tried 35 years ago.
Look, I mean, I've been in the lighting industry for 20 years, and I can honestly say, the conference I sat in on a month ago was actually driven by lighting designers and driven by the lighting design community. Even the City of London, as populous as that is, has now started to really reduce their lighting levels in that city, which is fantastic. So there's this global just swarm happening. You've got the research coming in from the field of astronomy, you've got the research coming in from ecology, human health impacts. There's a bit of a groundswell happening now, and to me it's a little bit like the early days of anti-smoking. The research is there now. We just got to get people to make that mental connection and switch.
Yeah, it certainly seemed to us that you had to approach this from a much broader platform. Forget about astronomy. Right? That just wasn't going to.
Sadly, that's probably the one thing that the least has the least impact when you start to talk about it.
It does. That's almost like a byproduct of getting all your other platforms in place, the pillars of your argument in place, and then take it from there. Forget about the night sky. That's just got to be a byproduct of actually, and as you saw with that shot of, just went out of my head now, in Arizona. Flagstaff, yeah. That shot of Flagstaff there and the one in China. If you could, to me it seems you've got to approach it with all those other things, and then those skies are going to be the natural outcome.
One of the interesting things in Tasmania, which is obviously unrelated to the Gold Coast though, is astronomy isn't so much a driver, but astrotourism is. And we know that people come down here just to photograph our skies. We know they come down here aurora chasing. And this is on the agenda of Tourism Tasmania. It's on the agenda of Brand Tasmania as well. Yeah. So we do have a bit of an advantage here, where I think, again, Tasmania could really lead the country because of we have a few unique characteristics here that we could hopefully show the way to the Gold Coast one day. Look at what Tasmania's doing.
I think from memory, Professor Fred Watson and Marnie Ogg are getting more involved in this.
Marnie actually formed the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance. Fred sits on the Street Lighting Standards Committee, so he's very much involved in this movement as well. And when we talk about this astrotourism, I caught up with them 3 months ago. They bought a tour group down here with Marnie's runs Dark Sky Traveller, and that was 25 people that I think were spending. The minimum spend was about 6,000. They were spending up to sort of $20,000 a head just to tour around Tasmania and take photographs of the night sky. So it just goes to show, and it's a beautiful industry because
I'm driving around for that.
It's you think about it. It's off peak. It's low environmental impact, and it draws attention. So it's great.
If I could, just before we stop for a break, as you've probably noticed, we've got some ringings down the back. It's Greg, Peter and Pat. 60% of the team of amateur astronomers called BOSS. That's Backyard Observatory Supernova Search. Search team, sorry, BOSS. In April, the Astronomical Society of Australia, which is the professional body representing astronomy in Australia, awarded BOSS the Berenice and Arthur Page Medal for services to professional astronomy by amateurs, which is the highest award given by the professional groups to amateur astronomers in Australia. And the gentlemen are here in Tasmania because there's an annual meeting of the ASA here in Hobart, and they're actually going to be presented at that meeting tomorrow with the medal.
Thank you for that. Can I just say something? I was Googling yesterday to see if there was anything on in Tasmania that might be of interest astronomy-wise. Lo and behold, you've got your meeting. How popular was that? And it's really holds a really important part to me coming to this meeting tonight, because back in 1984, my wife and I were we have relatives in Hobart, a lot of them actually. And we came
That's
back
unusual
for a wedding,
in
my
Tassie.
sister-in-law's wedding.
That's unusual in Tassie.
Well, my sister-in-law's wedding, and I walked into one of your bookshops, and second-hand bookshops, and they had the Observer's Guide to Astronomy by Patrick Moore, which I had when I was a young kid, my very first book. And I was about 23, 24, I think, back then. And I bought that book, and it got me back interested in astronomy in a big way. So it's kind of like an astronomical connection.
Well, if you're around on Friday, is our monthly observing night out at Mount Pleasant.
We're back on Thursday night. Thank you for the offer. Thank you for letting us come on tonight. I wasn't sure if it was masks or what kind of stuff.
I think we'll take a break for 10 or so minutes, and then we'll resume the evening.
So I'd just like to thank Landon for coming along. We can see how passionate you are about keeping dark skies in Tasmania. So. And I encourage you to join Dark Sky Tasmania.
Tonight, I'll be out at Mount Pleasant from about 5:30 till whenever, if it's a good night for anybody to come out to open up the facility there. If it's lousy, don't bother, I'll hang around till about 7 or something and go home if no one turns up, whatever. Or even if you want to come out and play with the toys, if it's lousy, do so. Turn up, but I'll be there from about 9:30.
I'll be there from about 4.
Yep, and in the next couple of days, I'll be sending out an email to membership about the school holidays. We're going to invite members to bring one day in the second week, to bring any school-age children who belong to members or grandchildren or children.
I'm pleased to say that I don't know when school holidays are, so that's coming up.
In about a fortnight.
Right.
Yeah,
The end of next week.
Yeah, okay. And just to give them hands-on experience with pushing buttons and watching things go whiz, yeah. And that's for any school-age children of members or grandchildren, and they can bring a mate, it doesn't matter. So I'll try and get something out about that about the next 2 days. And it's not on the website yet, but it looks as though our next meeting at the end of July, we'll have a presentation by the gentleman in Tassie who runs the Nikon School about nightscape photography, is what we're trying to organise. So thank you.
Should I turn the light up again, I think? Was that okay?
Yes. Oh, you'll tell us you.
Yeah. So I'll just introduce.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so Elliot Charlton again. He's a technical specialist, Pendoley Environmental, undertaking artificial light monotoring and using some new camera and spectrometers on the Bridgewater Bridge.
Yep.
So please welcome Mark. And we have Scott here from Pendoley too. He's assisting with Elliot.
If you could squeeze on a railway line under the bridge.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. I'll let them know about that. But yeah, so as I said, I'm Elliot. I'm from Pendoley Environmental. I'm a technical specialist. I've been with them for a couple of years now. But also my background is in astrophysics. I did my master's at Curtis and worked at VIC. Any of you worked with them or heard of it? Pendoley Environmental, founded about 25 years ago by Kelly Pendoley. We're based in WA, and we're an environmental consultancy specialising in marine turtles and also artificial light, and also a little bit more. Oh yeah, we have lots of dogs in the office. We've got 3 currently. So Patches, Rufus and Rolo, and then the team there at the international.
And they're all in management?
Yes, yeah, they're actually higher than me in the company.
Financial.
Yeah. But yeah, so we specialise in marine turtles and artificial lights and other stuff. So we dabble a bit in seabirds and other things like that. But yeah, artificial light, the problem. When we use an excess or uncontrolled amount of artificial light, we end up with light pollution. And as Landon has already gone through, we get a couple of impacts. So human impacts we've all seen, you're all astronomers. loss of night sky, disruption to circadian rhythm, nuisance lighting, glare, and so forth. But as Pendoley specialises with marine turtles, I'll tell you a little bit about what happens to marine turtles. So light impacting beaches can actually deter females from going up and nesting, which can impact them biologically if they don't nest. And if they do manage to nest, hatchlings can actually get disorientated by light. So rather than going into the ocean from natural cues of light, they can actually wander up the beach for a couple hundred meters and then maybe or maybe not make it to the water, depending on whether they get predated, or they could even go inland. So it's not good things for a biological receptor to have artificial light, in your horizon. And that's what's really good about the National Light Pollution Guidelines. So these are coming back quite recently, 2020, and these tell you sort of what impacts you can have on species. It currently only covers marine turtles, migratory shorebirds, and seabirds, so it tells you what impacts you'll have on those species. But then also addresses how you should go about managing your light, how you should monitor it and assess it, which up until now has been done quite poorly, using tools which we'll go through next, using tools which are specifically for human vision, photometric spectrum.
That's good enough, isn't it?
Unfortunately not for biological receptors, which is what we're going to talk about. So, artificial light monitoring receptors. So yeah, photometric spectrum related to the human eye. Everyone also always knows this, the CIE curve, peaking at 555 and dropping down either side. Unfortunately for biological receptors, they don't share the same evolution as us, so they're actually more sensitive to different bands of the spectrum, and mostly they're more sensitive to blue light than humans are. And you can see this being a problem with LEDs over here, having a massive blue peak for white LEDs. So this is becoming an even more pressing problem for biological receptors, that we have a lot more blue light. And then when we're trying to assess it, we're only using the human curve to assess it. We don't get any of this section down here, really, when we use these human tools. So, there's a bit of a mismatch there. So what tools do we use? Well, I'm sure quite a few. I'll jump across here. I'll bring it out. A few of you will have seen a sky quality meter before. This bad boy, you just stick it in the air, aim, press the button, you get a nice value. So it's a nice 12.68 visual magnitudes in here. So that takes a reading of about 40 degrees FOV above you, and it averages it into a visual magnitude unit, which uses the V-band, which is close to the photometric spectrum, but not exactly the same. And next we've got a lux meter. This is an industry standard for safety. So lux is like the incident light on a surface. So how bright is this room? How bright is this desk? How much can I see on a walkway? So industry will use this in AS 4282, which is a standard for road lighting. We'll use this and say, if I put my lux meter on the road, what is a person seeing on this road? Again, calibrated to the human eye, so it's not really great for a turtle or even human eyes, because when you measure a surface brightness, you don't really take into account how small the source is, and point sources can be quite bright and cause that sort of glare. Which brings us to our DSLR and fisheye combination. So this is sort of what most people will start using now, and astronomers will have used for quite a while, is this DSLR fisheye combination, which gives us whole sky imagery. It measures the red, green, and blue channels, more so than either of these two objects do. And it also allows us, due to the resolution, to quantify point sources as well as sky glow on the horizon. Because like these two instruments, they only average into a single point, essentially, whereas this allows us to see the whole sky. So that's what we've built at Pendoley Environmental. Over the past 10 years, we've had 3 generations of what we call Sky 42 cameras. So they use the DSLR fisheye lens combination, which allows for a whole hemisphere of light to be collected and imaged. So I'll go through a quick demonstration of this, but these have been built to be essentially put on beaches, hooked around in a backpack and deployed somewhere overnight and left there. I've got a little app here that actually lets me interact with it, and I can just deploy this, and it should, hopefully, there we go. So it'll do this 80 times a night if you've got, depending on your interval and your settings and that sort of thing, you can do it a bit more, a bit less, depending on what you're doing. So we can get 100 odd pictures a night, and we get this sort of return over here, which is a raw image from the fisheye lens, and that's in a really rural place. That's a beautiful gold standard sort of image right there. And you can actually see a few horizon sources around the edge of that image, a bit of glow there, but other than that, spectacular. But yeah, so we use these in the field. Mainly we do a lot of turtle monitoring with these. So we put these on beaches where turtles will be, and then we will analyze the light and see how turtles will be affected. The main use case for these, I'll turn this off before it starts going again. The main use case for these is actually benchmark monitoring. So you'll probably do it before. So I guess a bit of context would be, industry partners are now coming to us, as Landon said, for the National Light Pollution Guidelines. Excuse me. It's driven a lot of regulators to now start imposing restrictions and assessment to be done before you start building your project. You now have to assess the night sky and get a benchmark or baseline for what it looks like before you build a massive plant on it, which is pretty good for us, so we can say, it was this level before you built it, and then do another post-development impact monitoring assessment and say, it was this level and it is now this level. But yeah, so how do we go from this RGB image to something we can use, something quantifiable? So this is one of our typical outputs that we'll do for a client. Is we've got the two raw images here. One is the raw fisheye, one is the raw unwrapped equirectangular image. And what we do is actually we've got software that calibrates the camera's brightness to actually use known star values so that we can get a visual, or sky brightness value, which is visual magnitudes per square arc second. So we can have now a quantifiable unit similar to what you would get out of an SQM, but now for your whole image. So here we've got an example of a town on the horizon, some point source here. I think that's some sort of beacon or point light, maybe someone's floodlight that's been flipped up, has no shielding on it, and then the actual project site we were interested in. So you can see how this now allows us to say, well, you are having this impact on the horizon. And it's what makes it such a great tool for assessing artificial light at night.
So, Elliot, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no,
so you said you're doing that for clients. So is that because we're required by legislation, or are they doing it for
Yes, a bit of both, honestly. We've had both happen, but now with the light pollution guidelines for wildlife, we've seen a lot more. The EPA, all these regulators are now imposing it on different companies to have to do this. But we have had some that have been proactive, like getting ahead of the sort of the game in terms of monitoring and saying we actually are having little to no impact on these species. Yeah, this is an example of a rural sky at the top here, and then a site that is semi-rural, but it's got quite a few facilities there. So this is the RGB imagery, and again the visual magnitude imagery just gives you a better view of what's going on. So you can see here we've got a nice Milky Way up there, and then quite a dark zenith, and then down here, obviously the horizon is being absolutely destroyed by that sky glow. So this artificial light monitoring sort of captures current impacts and also a baseline impact. But the problem is when a project or a client wants to build something, how they know whether it is going to have an impact before they build it, before they go and spend millions of dollars building something. And that's where artificial light modeling comes into it, so that we can actually have a predictive model of what the light is going to be. And currently industry mainly uses sort of light design style models where it's lux and it's sort of self-contained, which doesn't really help you address biological receptors, which really need an angular component, a solid angle component to your measurements. So our artificial light model uses the Illumina model, which is developed by Martin Albe, who's a physics professor at Sherbrooke in Canada. Some of you may have heard him. He's got a lot of papers, does a lot of stuff to do with modeling the night sky. And now originally Martin, who's been working on this model for over 10 years, he developed this as a landscape model. So he actually models like whole countries, tens, hundreds of kilometers wide sort of scale. So we've built upon this model and working with him to kind of force it into a more of a industry client-specific approach. So we need something, on a shorter scale, a couple of tens of kilometers. And yeah, so the use case for this I'll show you some images which will make it a bit more clear, but we do landscape panoramas, which is sort of the point of view of an observer. So if it was me or a turtle or a bird or something like that, what would the sky look like to this observer if we did a 360 by 90 view? And that's what we've got here. So we've got north, east, south, west, north again, so 360 by 90. And this is a project site taken from 2 different observer locations. So this one's a bit closer, this one's a bit further away, and at a different angle, so that these 2 light sources on the bottom here are now split. So you can see how this could be quite useful if you have, for example, turtles on 10 different beaches, and you want to see what the impact at each beach would be from these turtles, because maybe 3 of the beaches are impacted, and maybe 5 of them aren't impacted, sort of thing. So this allows us to sort of predictively determine what a project or project site would have on a given receptor. And then the next, this is another one. So this is actually a flare. I know someone mentioned flares before. I think Landon, was it for Sandy something? Mining. So this is a flare at a facility modeled under 2 different conditions. So the first one is just clear sky conditions, and the second one is actually, the model allows us to do cloud and a bunch of different parameters. So you can have optical depth, aerosol quality, molecular makeup, so the ratio of aerosols to molecules. If you want to see it's a bit saltier, a bit more spray. If you're inland, it might be dustier, sort of thing. And the model allows for a lot of customizability. So we've got these 2 different ones, different environments, which is quite cool, and it allows us to see a worst case scenario. If it was cloudy, what would someone see? And then the other types, so those were both panorama style. This last type is what we call zenith modeling. So essentially we're doing what the SQM does, but on a larger landscape scale predictively. So we'll take an observer and put 1,000 by 1,000 on this grid, get them to look up at the 20 degrees, average that, and then generate this heat map of the land scale. So the lat longs have been anonymized so that we don't give away who this is, but this is some coastal development that is happening over tens of kilometers, hundreds of kilometers there.
Looks like an alien.
Yeah, a little bit, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, so essentially they had 2 big plant sites here with not very shielded lights, which is what these 2 big blobs are, and they have some other developments here. But so this I think this leads into cumulative impacts. So we've got both of these technologies now. We can monitor a baseline, and we can then model predictively what a site might look like and combine them, which will give you a complete picture. So rather than just having the model output, which doesn't really give you any context of the natural night sky or any of the other lights there, we can take the benchmark modeling, which has the Milky Way existing light sources, add it to our model output to get our cumulative impacts. And I think that's pretty much it. I don't think I missed anything, but pretty much all the highlights. Light pollution affects biological receptors. Most animals are sensitive to blue light, so we need to adapt our human sort of instruments to be more biologically friendly, or more biologically focused, sorry. We use our Sky 482 cameras to monitor light, do artificial light modeling, and then we can combine them to get cumulative impacts. Any questions?
I go out photographing ghost mushrooms, which are like little LED lights, garden LED lights.
Yeah.
They glow white to the naked eye. But when I'm often out when the moon is out, and so the moon creates a lot of light around it. But also when it's cloudy, I notice that the city lights, so the lights from Kingston and Blackman's Bay, reflect off the clouds and down onto the ground. So
that is actually
how do you take measurements of light reflected from the clouds?
So that's actually one of the limitations that we've been working to overcome, is that when you've got cloudy nights, depending on the thickness, the height and that sort of thing, it can actually make your data too bright to use. So for monitoring perspective at least, that's why we come out during the new moon period usually, so we always work on a new moon, because the moon is way too bright for us, and it kind of, not corrupt, but it makes your data, not really accurate. And same for the clouds, but we've been working on a model that will take, we've been proposing to take images that have partial cloud in them and just take sections that are missing cloud and sort of stitch it together into a mosaic. So that is one limitation of these, which I didn't mention, was clouds and also the moon. Anything sort of that's that bright. The sun as well doesn't work very well during the day. But those limitations are we work around those ideally, yeah.
And we go twice a year, we go up to Oatlands in central Tasmania
Yep.
For an astronomy weekend away where it's nice and dark. But over the last 10, 20 years, we've noticed the lights of Hobart and Sorell on the horizon getting bigger.
Yeah.
And the locals have told us they've noticed it too. So, but one, Andrew Cole runs the Visitor Optical Observatory just south of that.
Yep.
And he said he's noticed in the last 10 years too that the lights from the highway are interfering with their optical observations.
Yeah. So in terms of the Hobart stuff, I imagine like as well, the more blue light you go as well, the more it scatters. So I can imagine that you would get more scattering over the horizon and off of clouds and stuff like that, because it definitely increases your brightness on your horizon. And we see that in these when we get a little bit thin cloud on the horizon, that whole direction is much, much brighter from that. And as you can imagine, getting this data in Tasmania is quite challenging with the cloud cover.
Is humidity affected without cloud cover?
In terms of the monitoring, it only affects it, it would affect the light sources itself, but in terms of being able to capture things, the humidity would only affect it if the lens got, humid sort of thing. But that is another thing, is that when we do this sort of stuff, we put a disclaimer that the captured light is a product of its environment. So if it's more humid one night, or if there's more particulate in the air, you're going to get much brighter sources than you would any other time of the year. It's one of those things that you can't really control. You can just hope to get enough data sets that you sort of average it out.
Yeah, Bridgewater's rather foggy at times.
Yes, we were looking today, because we're going to go monitoring after this, because it's our last night of monitoring, so we'll be out probably to some ungodly hour. But yes, we noticed that the fog/cloud was rolling in off the mountain, and it's going to make it a bit tricky to get much data.
But at the end of the day, even if your data isn't correct, it's still impacting. It's still showing the fact that cloud is
100%. Yeah.
And the humidity is changing it, or the fog's changing it, lensing it, or whatever. It's still, even though the values aren't right, the effect is correct.
Exactly. It's just so you can provide a qualitative discussion on that, but you can't provide anything quantitative, unfortunately. It's a bit like this. So you have the flare, here it's having a significant impact, but you add cloud and it just absolutely destroys the sky.
It'd be all very well to say, well, we'll build it based on the top level, on the fact that, okay, fine, it's not perfect, but it's not everywhere. But in reality,
20% of the year.
Next week in Tasmania, and it's gone back to normal. You've got that.
Exactly.
We've noticed in more recent years, in particular, that the cloud coverage is more frequent. And you definitely do get some very strange lights happening in the sky when it's completely cloud covered.
And the lights could be something else, Brenda, like substances.
UFOs?
You're basing that on your own experience.
Are you speaking from experience? No.
We aren't sharing what that shed's about. I told you that you will.
The other thing I was going to ask you, if you're doing a study on turtles, would it be true to say that the issues with the light is why we get a lot more roadkill now as well? Because haven't they done studies about the dazzling of the lights are affecting the animals more?
I've definitely seen a couple of studies about roadkill and sort of lights. I don't remember what they said on the top of my head, but for turtles specifically, and again, not a biologist, so this is more what I've learnt. They have natural cues, which are usually the full moon, so you'll have a dark horizon, or dark background, which will be the June, and then they'll go towards the lighter horizon, which is the ocean, because it's just a little bit lighter than the June, it'll catch a bit more light. So that's their normal cue. So if you have lights that are lighting up the June, or possibly lighting up a area of the beach, they can get disorientated. For roadkill, or maybe not roadkill, but animals may become roadkill. I wouldn't be able to say myself, but I can imagine that light probably does have an effect on them. And as Landon said, it can disrupt ecological hunting and breeding, and that might add into it, that if they're more active during the night than they would otherwise be, that could add to it. But again, I can't remember what those papers said off the top of my head.
It's like northwest Tasmania had the issue with the penguins. I don't know whether you're aware of that.
No. Stanley
and some of the towns up there have had issues that the town lights were drawing the younger penguins, or even the penguins when they came in. they're drawing them into town.
Oh, okay,
so what
yeah.
they've done is that basically during that time they either turn off or turn down the lighting to assist them and stop them from doing that.
Yeah.
And so that's something that they've already started, well and truly for a long time now, I think, to do that. But a question about night birds and animals that fly over night time, so bats, birds, moths, whatever. How does this affect what you're doing? Are you able to quantify the effect that it's having on the animals that are at not altitude, basically?
Yeah, so technically we can. We haven't actually done it yet. I mean, we've done models of, because essentially when you set the model up, there's 100 parameters or whatever, but you can set the height of your observer. So technically you can get your observer, put it at, I don't know what the average bird flight height is, but maybe like 50 meters, and you can look down rather than up, or around like you can here. Yeah, so you can do it. We haven't actually done anything, so I don't have any case studies of it, but it's definitely possible. Although we do manage to break the model in new and various ways every time we try something new, so it's definitely possible. But I guess on the thing of those penguins being distracted, it's one of the hard things that we find is quantifying in a biologically meaningful way. So for turtles, as you can see here, we've got this radiance brackets full moon. So we've converted the radiometric values into what you would expect from a typical full moon. So, and that's the brightest thing that a hatchling or a turtle would see. So there's going to be lots of this in the future, I think, as the National Light Pollution Guidelines expands to different fauna. Like, what is there? How do you relate the brightness to an impact sort of thing? And that's where, for humans, we sort of have the Bortle scale and visual magnitudes. For turtles, it's sort of, we are currently relating it to the full moon, but in 2 years' time it could be different. That's definitely a big challenge in the sort of area of biology, and light pollution and artificial light is tying it to impacts is definitely a challenge.
It's like the offshore lighting with the fish farms and the fishing boats and that sort of thing. That's not land-based, but obviously it's going to have an impact as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of fish farms south of here, and we also get a lot of auroras, like we had one a couple of months ago. So while you're keeping an eye out for the auroras, but people often look south and they see a green light, and they try and contact everyone and say, is that an aurora? But it's not, it's actually the fish farm lights reflecting off the clouds.
Off the clouds, okay,
So they're getting a green light from the fish farms, or a blue light.
Yeah, it is, some of the lights and the effects of, especially lower cloud, that's thick, it just pretty much acts as like a hard surface reflecting the light back to you, so yeah, it can be pretty bad.
Excellent.
Yes, so
as an astrophotographer, I'm curious about what's in the box.
Yes.
Canon 700D, I think, off the top of my head, with a fisheye lens.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's an 8mm fisheye lens or something?
So yeah, I didn't build these, but I'm pretty sure it's something like that. I mean, I might be able to see the, nope, can't see the name on it, but it's probably something like that. 700D is the one we use because those, something to do with the sensor on it. It has a specific sensor that we use that will allow for the calibration of it against stars. But yeah, that's specifically what's in here, and then we've just built a bunch of hardware around it, that allows us to remotely deploy it and do all that fun stuff.
So how do you stop the lens queuing up?
You get lucky is how you start getting that. No, we do put coatings on it and stuff like that, and we do, typically, it depends how remote you're deploying it. Usually we're in WA, so we're in the coast during summer, during turtle nesting season, so there's, you do get a bit of moisture if it's humid in the morning, but mostly it's just red hot, so it kind of evaporates during the day.
So dust would be your problem?
So dust is more the problem, sand, that sort of thing. So these have been like hardened against that sort of stuff because they get bashed. Turtles have knocked them over, punted them, tried and had a bite out of them, that sort of thing. So this is actually our second generation. We do have a third generation, which is a bit newer, but those are currently deployed, and this one was the only spare one, so I just wanted to bring it for the demonstration. But the new ones are slightly different, a bit more. We've got newer technology around them, essentially, that will allow for a lot more things to happen with them.
So you deploy them at night and come back the next day to retrieve the data?
Yes.
Or transmit
So for the new cameras, technically we can transmit it over 4G and send it to ourselves, but for most of these older ones, we'll go back every day and collect the data. But for the newer ones, like I said, we've got a lot more features in it, so we can leave it out for a couple of nights, and we're testing solar panels and that sort of thing to see if we can get longer periods of time and then transmit the data back to us, that sort of thing. So it's all very much a work in progress. We're constantly working on them. But yeah, our third generation just came out and we're pretty happy with them.
Right. Just on a different subject.
Yep.
In museums, light is very dangerous to artifacts.
Yep.
And they fade very quickly. Do you go in and test the light out?
We've done some, not necessarily museums, but we've done some sort of like lux studies. I imagine for that sort of, for a museum, it would probably be you don't want too blue light. I imagine that's what's deteriorating pages. I wouldn't be able to say definitely, but I imagine blue, strong light would be what deteriorates pages, because I know that can actually affect developing eyeballs and that sort of thing. You can actually kill the cells or something. So I imagine it would be that sort of thing. You don't want anything close to the UV around paper. Yeah. But we haven't done any of that. Definitely would be interesting, but we've not as of yet. Mostly biological stuff.
Yeah, no, I've seen uniforms where they've had a nice stripe across them.
Yeah.
So they've been in the light for so long that
I think we'll move on. And thanks very much, Elliot.
No worries.
And Richard.
Now, Phil. I love that news. Okay, so this is going to be a very quick talk, so truncated. With a lot of dark screens on it. Just a couple of things. If you're looking north at the moment, last time I spoke, I think I talked about Virgo and the massive number of galaxies you can look at towards the north. But at the moment, this is for mid-July. One of the interesting things, that beautiful star Spica, I don't know how many of you know, 250 light years away. It's a spectroscopic binary, and the bigger component, it's a B1, I think, giant star, very blue as you can see, is spinning at an incredible rate. I think it's about 170 something kilometres a second. So, and the other star, the other component is just an ordinary blue star right next to it, but they rotate, they go about each other once every 4 days. So I don't know what the separation is, but quite an amazing thing. Now, if you want to see star colour, one of the things I suggest is if you're doing visual observation, is to defocus your telescope, and you can actually see, if you get a slightly larger disc, you can actually see the colour. I did that with Regal, a wonderful thing. Arcturus, a red giant, 25 times the size of our present sun. It's actually gone off the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. It's off the, what do you call it? The
Main sequence.
Main sequence, thank you. I was looking for the word. Gone off the main sequence. It's swelling up, and it's 35 million kilometres in diameter, and that's only 37 light years away. But that's very orange. It's a K-type star. Another spectacular thing to look at, and it's been imaged. So yeah, nice orange glow. A couple of bright markers in the northern sky. Now, Pan-STARRS, Comet C 2017/K2 or 2K is whizzing through the sky at the moment, about magnitude 7 over there on the right. And it's going to be visible for quite a while. In fact, I read that it's going to disappear around about April next year. And it's going to do a big circuit. And if you look at sky maps, you will see that it's going through Ophiuchus at the moment, and it's going to go up through Ophiuchus, curl around and disappear, I think near, not far from where Orion's sitting in April next year. So it's got a huge arc, and its magnitude will drop to about 6. So now, something we don't often talk about is the Great Globular Cluster in Hercules. Now this thing is an amazing globular cluster. I think it's got about 300,000 or 400,000 stars. But it's famous for a particular reason. It's got a lot of blue stragglers in it. You can actually see quite a few blue stragglers in the galaxy. It's densely packed, globular cluster, densely packed, really densely packed, and the collisions have created these blue stragglers, which astronomers are investigating closely. The interesting thing about it is, though, that it's got, it's 22,000 light years away, I think, something like that. It's famous because in 1974, does anyone know what happened in 1974? No. In 1970, this is a wide field view of it. In 1974, SETI, you know, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, they actually beamed a signal towards this globular cluster. Now, one of the principles of that, the idea, the guy behind it, was Drake. Now, Drake, you might know, is a famous, he's still alive, he's 92. I was reading, 92 years of age, came up with the Drake equation, which tried to work out a formula for detecting how many communicative intelligent civilizations there might be in the Milky Way. And have you ever seen the Drake's equation? Anyway, you know, a fellow of Harvard and Cornell, very bright fellow, and he was ably assisted by Carl Sagan. Now, they sent out this binary signal. This is a visual representation of the signal. This is why I was so interested in this. And it was in binary. But so this is not, it wasn't in colour or anything. But it went through it counted, it had the code for the numbers 1 to 10, and then it went through and it had, I forget the planets, the human DNA, the size of a human, the Arecibo telescope itself, which is where SETI was based, at Mount Arecibo. Arecibo, you know, big dish that disintegrated recently. So that was a very interesting thing. I was reading about that, and that's the signal. Really exciting. Now, the idea of this was to represent, that's just a sound equivalent of the signal. But the idea was to represent how clever humans were, or at least our civilization was.
Do you do it till you go home?
The problem is that when you look at the when you look at that, it looks childishly simple in some way and naive.
I was thinking it looks like an 1980s video game.
Yeah. So that's Drake. That's Drake, and that, of course, is my hero, Carl Sagan. So, but Drake is still alive. Carl Sagan passed in 1996, but you remember him from the great, those of us who are my age will remember Cosmos, which was still the best, one of the best things I ever watched. Anyway, let's move on, leave that globular cluster and come to a very interesting part of the sky at the moment, of course, is east. We talked about Sagittarius last time, so I won't go over that. However, there is a couple of things here. This beautiful star cluster here. Now, at the top of Scorpius, you know the two stars, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Scorpii? I think I might have mentioned them before. Well, here they are here. Now, these two stars, they look like a double. When you look at them, this is at the top of the Scorpion's tail, up here. If I can use my pointer. I'm sorry I'm going so fast, but I did promise to oh, that's even worse. I'll just reduce it to a red dot at the very top there. You can see the clusters marked out right next to these stars. Beautiful cluster of stars. I have never seen it through a telescope yet, but you can, you know, it's a standout. Absolutely gorgeous. Now, next to it are these two stars. Now, the interesting thing about these two stars is they're very similar in brightness. This is a giant. That one in the background is actually virtually a hypergiant. The difference is, the one at the bottom is 135 light years away. The one at the top is 5,700 light years away. So you can imagine, look, they're almost similar in brightness. Imagine the power from the one in the background. So that's I thought that was an interesting thing. So that's right near the Scorpion's tail, a beautiful cluster which we probably shouldn't ignore. The Northern Jewel Box is its common name. So just moving on. So that's Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 down here. So the famous one, so this is the one that we think, you know, you look at it and you think it doesn't belong to the cluster at all. But that one does. It's right at the further away actually probably than the cluster, but similar. And this is along the Sagittarius arm of the galaxy, the neighbouring arm. M22, beautiful globular cluster, 10,000 light years away. A spectacular one. The interesting thing about it, I think it's about 145 light years across. But the surprising thing is, it's supposed to be a magnitude of 5.1, or between 5.1 and 5.8, but its light is dimmed by a lot of dust. So this is one of those globulars that should be brighter because it's closer, but it's actually the light between us and it has been dimmed by a lot of interstellar gas and material. It's a beautiful example of a globular cluster, so draw your attention to that. And finally, we're getting close to south. Yeah, they're the usual culprits to look at. I've always come up with these, but you already know where these are. Omega Centauri, Centaurus A, the Wishing Well cluster, still up in the night sky. You can see these year-round virtually. But at the moment, the Southern Cross is just cresting. It's about, I think it's about 7 o'clock when it's absolutely on the meridian at the moment. So in July, it'll be just past it. Eta Carinae up on the right there, and of course the beautiful June cluster, which we all love and we've seen. Recommended that you look at that through 100 magnifications. It's absolutely beautiful. And a new cluster I discovered with these glasses. Now I've got to tell you, I went to the optometrist because I virtually need a seeing eye dog of mine, so it's pretty bad. And I wanted to get some good glasses for a long distance. And I had a pair, and I had a cataract removed, and they got thrown out. And I got these. And I could not believe my eyes. I went out in the dark the other night and looked up, and I could swear, I could see half all the stuff here looked like I was looking through a telescope. It was so sharp and bright. I nearly did cartwheels in the backyard. I thought, this is wonderful. This is just like looking through my big APM scope. And then I looked at the moon, and it didn't have 3 limbs as usual. It was just the one. And that was a wonderful revelation. So get yourself some good glasses if you need them.
Or it sounds like you've been into Dallas much.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I could not believe the difference. These are absolutely fantastic. I'd hate my optometrist, but I don't think she'd appreciate that. Anyway, she did such a good job of prescribing these. So, anyway, IC23, that is a naked eye cluster. This is a naked eye cluster. You can actually see it without any difficulty at all.
It's pretty young as well.
And pretty young. Yes, they can tell by the colour of the stars. So, and in fact, I'm just going to show you something else in a moment. You might identify the sprinter. Of course, the sprinter's here. And down here, the Pearl cluster, 3766. We'll keep going. And Kappa Crucis, of course. Now, a couple of things just down here, IC2602, the Southern Pleiades. And by the way, I think those two are of a similar age, the Pleiades and 2391, which is the Omicron Velorum cluster. Now, can you see what I'm going to be doing here? It's hard to identify in a star field, but what's this? The false cross? False cross. So we've got Kappa and Delta Velorum here, and Eta and Iota, Epsilon and Iota Carinae. So that's this one here is Aspidisci, and this cluster is right next to Aspidisci. And that one up there is Markeb. They've got a lot of Arabic names. And of course Avior and, Alcefina I should say. And then down here Avior and Aspidisci up here.
So that IC2391, that's the visual cluster you were talking about?
Yes, Omicron, yes, beautiful.
Right next to the false cross?
Yes, right next to the false cross. You can't miss it. It really stands out on a clear night. It's quite, I think its magnitude is 2.5. So most of these things are 5,000, 4,000 light years away. But here's a close-up of, you can see Aspidisci, Alcefina, Avior. You can always pick out the sprinters just below Avior. Now this is tipped on its side, of course, so you can just make it out. So here's the false cross asterism that you often see. Now, because it's on the side, it doesn't stand. If you look at it horizontally, it's easy to make out next to the Southern Cross. I've tipped it over because I want to show you 2391, which is that thing we were just looking at, the Omicron Velorum. That's Omicron Velorum there, that star, and there it is on the right-hand side of the picture. Beautiful cluster, but why is it interesting? Because around about here is, if I can just show you, a spectacular quadruple double binary system, the youngest one ever discovered. A pair of double stars, 420 light years from Earth, and wait till you see this. This is the pattern of their path around each other. Quite amazing. So, and in fact, I've seen there's you can, if you go on the web, there's a model of how these stars move. Quite fascinating. So that's one to look out for, and there's a little illustration of it. So slightly cooler and slightly hotter stars, but yeah. Amazing. So I'm going to come back and talk about Vela sometime because I think there's a lot of stuff in Vela that we need to look at. Beautiful things like those stars there. Oh, something gone back, that was a... And lastly, facing west, something that might be interesting too. I think we've discussed this before. Right next to, yeah, this is southwest of course. So we were up here, this is the false cross up here. Down here is this very bright star, Rigor, and NGC 2547, the Gamma Velorum cluster. Now that star is amazing, Rigor I mean, down here. Before we talk about the cluster, just down here, this star, wow. Part of the binary, one of the binary components of that system is a Wolf-Rayet star and an O-class star. Gigantic, two enormous stars, very hot stars, right next to each other, as part of a more complex multiple star. I don't know what's happened with that red dot star. Yeah. So this constellation I'm very excited about. I think we ought to look into it. I might do a talk on Vela sometime because I think it's worth it. But isn't that a beautiful cluster? So 15 arc minutes wide, 20 to 30 million years old, very blue, very young, 1,200 light years away, 9 M dwarfs. That's a bit like, can you remember when we did the Wishing Well cluster? There were 7 giants and 7 dwarves in there. I always find that so amusing, but there were 7 red giants and 7 dwarves. Well, this one's got 9 dwarves in it, but anyway. 5.2 light years, and that's not very wide as clusters go. But yeah, and here's Rigor, the one I'm going to talk about sometime in the future. Anyway, just moving on. The star map for this month. Here goes the comet up here. You can see it. Just trace the arc. This goes up to the 9th of September, but in actual fact, get stuck that thing. I didn't mean to do that. Let's go back. It curls around here and disappears. I'm trying to think where it goes. I've forgotten. But its path continues well into 2023. So it'll be up and it gets brighter. It gets to magnitude 6 before it starts to dwindle again.
So that's out to the east, just after sunset.
Yeah, well, the Ficus,
there all night.
the snake bearer. And that's the back, oh, we won't dwell on that. But the website, you know where these maps are, you can download them. I use them for the NSE course and other things. And lastly, I thought I'd end on a bit of humour. You know, you can't beat Gary Larson. Mathematicians, astronomers, you name it, he's always got everything covered. That does amuse me. Anyway, that's all I want to say to you very quickly. A couple of nice things to look at in the northern sky and the eastern sky in particular. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.